Have you ever wondered about the full, unvarnished story of the slave trade in Africa? It's a history far more complex and devastating than what's often taught. For centuries, a shadow stretched across the continent, not just from foreign ships, but from within, tearing apart families, erasing cultures, and leaving scars that endure to this day. This isn't just history. It's a human story of immense suffering and incredible resilience that demands to be understood. Let's journey back in time, long before European ships arrived on the West African coast. Slavery, in various forms, existed in many societies around the world, including in Africa. It was often the result of warfare, where captives were taken, or a way to pay off debts. In many of these systems, slavery was not necessarily a permanent, inherited condition. People could sometimes earn or be granted their freedom, and their children wouldn't automatically be born into servitude. It was a brutal reality, but it was fundamentally different from what was to come. Then, starting around the 7th century, the trans-Saharan slave trade began. Arab merchants and North African Berbers crossed the vast desert, trading goods like salt, cloth, and beads for gold, ivory, and, tragically, human beings. Over more than 1,000 years, millions of Africans, primarily from West, Central, and East Africa, were forced on grueling marches across the Sahara to markets in North Africa, the Middle East, and even parts of Southern Europe. This trade was long-lasting and had a devastating demographic impact, but it was the arrival of Europeans that would escalate the practice to an industrial, unprecedented scale. In the 15th century, Portuguese explorers first sailed down the West African coast, initially seeking gold and a sea route to Asia. But they soon discovered a far more profitable commodity: human labor. As European powers like Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, and the Netherlands began colonizing the Americas, they needed a massive workforce for their sugar, tobacco, cotton, and coffee plantations. They first tried to enslave Native American populations, but disease and resistance made this unsustainable. They then turned to indentured servants from Europe, but not in nearly the numbers required. And so, they turned their full attention to Africa. This began the transatlantic slave trade, the largest forced migration in human history. It was a brutal, triangular system. European ships sailed to Africa's coast with manufactured goods, guns, textiles, alcohol. These goods were traded with some African kings, chiefs, and merchants for captured Africans. It's a painful and complex part of this history that some African leaders and groups participated in the capture and sale of other Africans, often from rival ethnic groups or through warfare explicitly aimed at capturing people. The introduction of European firearms dramatically intensified these conflicts, creating a vicious cycle of violence where more guns led to more wars, which led to more captives to be traded for even more guns. The journey across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage, was a nightmare of unimaginable horror. Men, women, and children were packed into the dark, filthy holds of ships, chained together with barely any room to move. Disease, malnutrition, and sheer brutality were rampant. It's estimated that for every 100 people captured, many died on the forced march to the coast, and as many as 15 to 20 more would die during the voyage itself. They were treated not as human beings, but as cargo. This wasn't just a system of labor, it was a system of dehumanization. For those who survived the Middle Passage, they arrived in the Americas to a life of brutal, backbreaking labor. They were sold at auctions, separated from their families, and forced to work from sunup to sundown under the constant threat of the whip. Their names were taken, their languages forbidden, their cultures and religions suppressed. They were legally considered property, chattels, with no rights, no freedom, and no hope of escape for themselves or their descendants. This system of chattel slavery, where a person and their children are the legal property of an owner for life, was the cornerstone of the economic development of the Americas. This is a heavy topic, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed. But it's vital that we don't look away. Understanding this history is the first step toward healing and ensuring such atrocities are never repeated. If you believe this knowledge is important, please take a moment to like this video and share it. By sharing, you help combat ignorance and ensure these stories are not forgotten. Let's continue this journey of understanding together. Resistance was a constant thread throughout the entire history of slavery. From the very beginning, people fought back. They resisted capture in Africa. They organized revolts on the slave ships, even though the odds were impossible. On the plantations, resistance took many forms. There were overt rebellions, like the Haitian Revolution, where enslaved people rose up, overthrew their French colonizers, and established the first independent Black republic. This sent shockwaves of fear through slave-owning societies everywhere. But there was also daily resistance, working slowly, breaking tools, feigning illness, or preserving cultural traditions, music, and stories in secret. Many risked everything to escape, forming maroon communities, hidden settlements of formerly enslaved people in remote areas like mountains and swamps, where they could live in freedom. These acts of defiance, big and small, were acts of incredible courage and a powerful testament to the unbreakable human spirit's desire for freedom. The movement to abolish the slave trade grew in the late 18th and 19th centuries, fueled by the moral arguments of abolitionists in Europe and America, many of whom were former slaves themselves, like Olaudah Equiano, whose autobiography exposed the horrors of the trade to a wide audience. They organized, wrote pamphlets, petitioned governments, and led boycotts. Eventually, the economic and moral pressures became too great. Great Britain, once the largest participant in the trade, abolished the slave trade in 1807 and began using its powerful navy to intercept slave ships. Other European nations followed, though the illegal smuggling of people continued for decades. Slavery itself was abolished later, in the British Empire in 1833, in the United States in 1865 after a brutal civil war, and in Brazil, the last country in the Americas to do so, in 1888. But the end of slavery did not mean the end of oppression. The legacy of the slave trade is deep and far-reaching. In Africa, it left a legacy of demographic collapse, political instability, and economic underdevelopment that many regions are still grappling with. Generations of the strongest and most creative people were stolen, and the constant warfare fueled by the trade tore at the continent's social fabric. In the Americas and across the diaspora, the legacy is seen in the systemic racism and inequality that are the direct descendants of the ideologies created to justify slavery. The idea that people of African descent were inferior was a lie invented to make the brutal exploitation of human beings seem acceptable. That lie has cast a long, dark shadow that persists in social structures, economic disparities, and prejudices to this day. However, the legacy is also one of incredible resilience, strength, and cultural richness. Out of the crucible of slavery, vibrant new cultures were forged. African traditions in music, food, religion, and language blended with other cultures to create something new and powerful that has enriched the world, from jazz and blues to samba and Caribbean cuisine. Understanding the history of the slave trade is not about assigning blame or dwelling in the past. It's about acknowledging the truth of our shared human story, honoring the memory of the millions who suffered, and recognizing how this history continues to shape our present. It's about committing ourselves to fighting for a world where the dignity and freedom of every single person are respected. Thank you so much for watching and for taking the time to learn about this crucial part of our world's history. If you found this video valuable, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our future explorations of history. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. Thanks again, and see you next time.